friends, on the behalf of Usanas Foundation, I welcome all of you again to another segment of Usanas Dialogues. Today we are discussing something which is very, very critical and doesn't seem to be stopping at all. By every passing day, it seems that it's going to escalate more and more, and we get to hear interesting tales of pagers and walkie-talkie bombs and all kinds of espionage thriller drama, which we normally watch in movies. But more than the movies, this is a conflict which is becoming a great threat to the humanity and the global peace. So today we have brought amazing experts with us today to discuss the nuances of this conflict and the question that whether peace is possible or not, or it's too late to reverse the conflict, or are we going to see more escalation in the future. Today we are joined by Armenak Tokmajyan. He's a non-resident scholar at Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut. And we have Mr. Yegia Tajinian, Regional and International Affairs Cluster Coordinator, Islam Affairs Institute of Public Policy and International Affairs, American University of Beirut. We have Ambassador Gautam Dharmendra, who is the former High Commissioner to the Republic of Zambia and former Ambassador to Islamic Republic of Iran. And to moderate and chair the session, we have Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, member Usanas Advisory Board and former Indian envoy to Libya, Malta, and Jordan. And more than that, mentor, friend, philosopher, and guide to Usanas Foundation. So without wasting much time, I'll just hand it over to Ambassador Trigunayat. But before that, so each speaker will have about 12 minutes for their opening remarks. I'll request you to stick to the time limits. And after the opening remarks are done, we'll open the house for questions and answers for about 15 to 20 minutes. Over to you, Ambassador Trigunayat. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Abhinav. And as you rightly mentioned, that we are meeting today at a time when this Middle East war is showing no signs of any let-up. In fact, more and more chances of escalation are quite visible. It is very difficult to understand what is the motive behind, except the way it has been done in Gaza or now very likely in Lebanon with Hezbollah there. This is something, of course, it will be discussed, but we have also seen that Israel, in the meantime, has been able to significantly overpower Hamas. And there were news that after Haniyeh, Yahya Sinwar is also probably out of the scene, or whether killed or injured. You don't know. The reports are coming today. There's a lot of gray zone warfare activities that are taking place. So the bombs are galore everywhere. We have seen the carpet bombing of Gaza that has happened, which has taken a huge toll of the population and really challenged the conscience of the world. But what we are witnessing is that is in the whole game, the international system is completely either off guard or totally absent, or the defiance of the international law, whether it's humanitarian international law or otherwise, is become the order of the day by nearly all powers. It used to be generally the domain of the superpowers until now. But now we are seeing that the middle powers and even smaller powers are doing that. So that's not a very good sign. At the same time, we all know that Iran supports Hezbollah, Houthi, and Hamas, and Qatar Hezbollah in Iraq, and all four of them have been activated. More so after when Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran. So we have been waiting for some kind of a response. What kind of a response will be there? But so far, Israel has shown strategic patience in not getting directly involved. But today, the Iranian president said that they will continue to support Hezbollah as long as US continues to support Israel. In that sense, it seems that Iran tends to equate itself with USA. It has these three major proxies that do the bidding for it. They are very important for its own survival in the region and for the asymmetric advantage that the Iranians have in the region. As far as the US is concerned, I feel that the US's capacity to control or contain Israel has been questioned in this war. We have seen for the first time that the Secretary of State has come to the region more than, I think, about 8 or 10 times. And if you see his discussions when he speaks to uh, the Israeli prime minister and the leaders, he seems to be one of the most harassed men. And nothing seems to work. And yet today also, John Kirby has said that they have advised Israel not to open the second front, while at the same time they have sent more weapons in the system, more arms, more people in the region. So this is the story that goes on, and it is being replicated. It seems going to be replicated in Lebanon also. Now, Lebanese government, obviously, as Prime Minister McCarthy has said, that they are not at war. They don't want to be at war. It seems nobody wants the war, yet the war is happening. People are dying. They're being displaced. And as Thierry and our friend also, Mr. Tashian, was mentioning earlier, that since the war with Hamas became, Hezbollah has been pressuring through cross-border attacks, making lot 60, 70,000 Israelis leave the region in northern Israel. And therefore, the same tactic now, as far as psychological warfare is concerned, is being done by Netanyahu. What he has done is essentially this morning, in a statement that he told the Lebanese people to leave, and saying that we have nothing against Lebanon, but the Hezbollah, which is embedded there, the arms, ammunition, there are targets. So large number of people are leaving in, our friends from Beirut, both of them, and we are very happy to have them today on the panel. Will tell us the ground situation, what is happening. So another thing that we have seen last 1 week ago about is that the bursting of the explosions devices that are embedded in the pagers and the walkie-talkies are not only related or contained to this particular war. They in fact have a much larger uh, impact on the overall way the war is going to happen or is going to take, and how the global powers are going to find a way to contain it. Because this is shown the worst of the lot. It not only causes the psychological warfare, but that can get into many other domains like the civil aviation, the ordinary people, malls, everywhere. So you can indulge in huge casualties. And of course, as expected, the Israeli President Herzog had said that there's no hand of Israel in this, while it seems very, very open. And it has been condemned by the United Nations. But we have been seeing the condemnations, the UN Security Council resolutions, the statements, the pleas, from the Arab world, from others, which is reticent. So I hope Ambassador Dharmendra will mention about the role of Iran and the Arab world. What are they doing? Are they doing anything, if at all? And how would the strategic questions of Iran will continue, for how long, and whether they are capable of doing it? I mean, there is now one of the big questions come is that we all talk about hundred thousands of missiles and here and there. A lot of destruction could follow. But at the same time, we are not able to judge whether really the each side has the capacity to inflict equivalent damage on the other side, especially on Israel. And that, so we'll have to see how it goes out. The new, I believe the hypersonic missiles are also being deployed, and let's see how it happens. But hopefully, and all three of you may kindly also tell us, do you see what is the end game, especially of Hezbollah and the Israelis? Iran, we know. But at the same time, do you see an end to it? Is peace possible? At the moment, it looks unlikely. So may I now request Ambassador Dharmendra to kindly deliver his remarks.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you for having me over. First of all, I'd like to thank Abhinav from the Usanas Foundation and his team for having me over. We spoke a couple of weeks ago, but this is my first associationship with the Usanas. Look forward to more such engagements, and thank you all. I would also like to, welcome my colleagues Armenak, Tokmajyan, and Tashian. I hope I got your names right. I hope you're safe in Beirut. Having served in Tehran during difficult years, I can understand this uncertainty and period. So I hope both of you are staying safe. I think some of the what's animating the landscape, how the landscape is now positioned, has already been covered by Anil. So I'll just briefly refresh some of the points. One, we are just now a few weeks away from the first anniversary of what triggered the present situation, that is the events of 7th October, well known to all of us. Again, there's no end in sight of this ongoing, quite devastating war. Anil raised some important points about international humanitarian law. I think that can be addressed in the Q&A session. No ceasefire in sight, no decision on hostages release. Ceasefire talks have been on and off, started and stalled, as is also the release of the hostages. All sides, I think, for the time being at least, are making an effort to keep the conflict below a certain manageable threshold. We have not seen the conflict expand through the region. I think these were initial fears. So there seems, it is, whether deliberately or not, it seems to be staying below a certain threshold. Unfortunately, the civilian loss on all sides is devastating, particularly in Gaza and now in Lebanon, with reports of at least 500 dead in the last 2 days. I think it's quite unfortunate. But also populations on both sides, particularly in southern Lebanon and northern Israel, have been displaced in their own country. So, what exactly is happening, how it's happening, I think we've all been through that. I think my colleagues in Beirut will be able to better address this, but somewhere I sense there also be war fatigue amongst the population, coupled particularly with economic distress in Lebanon. I think it's been going on since the explosion in the port in Beirut 2 years ago. I think there's still instability, there's no government, and Hezbollah seems to be calling the shots in Lebanon. As expected, Israel is currently dominating both the escalatory ladder and retains its dominance of the escalatory dominance. Israel is also, unfortunately, showing greater risk appetite and seems to be determined to establish battlefield dominance. Perhaps this is tactical. It will help shape the negotiations as and when they take place. But for the time being, Israel is dominant, has been able to accept losses and inflict severe damage on both sides, in west in Gaza and in north in Lebanon. Also, we have to note that after all the political challenges and travails and difficulties, Netanyahu is today in a much stronger position. I think he's managed somewhere to, typically, Netanyahu being Netanyahu, has pulled a Houdini and remains much more dominant again, remains much stronger politically. Of course, Anil again touched upon it. I'll briefly go through this. Israel has severely degraded the Hamas's military capabilities, and lately has expanded this and damaged and inflicted, I must say, quite a heavy blow on Hezbollah. Sabotage of thousands of pages, communication devices, is quite unprecedented. It's never happened. And as again Anil pointed out, we'll have to see how this plays out in future, because discussions are ongoing in New York on looking at lethal unarmed vehicles and weapon systems. Whether this falls into that domain, we'll have to see, because these are civilian use, dual use items, and using them to carry out an explosive, which can be debilitating and cause severe injury, will have to be addressed, I think, perhaps in the first committee in New York and in the CD in Geneva. Also, we have to take note of the series of assassinations which Israel has successfully carried out of Hezbollah's top and mid-level commanders, particularly of most recent, it's been apparently Ibrahim Akil, but then we also have Ismail Hania in an attack in Tehran a day after new President Pezeshkian was sworn in. And Hania's assassination, along with the back-to-back assassination of Hania and Fawz Shukr in end July, has obviously dealt a blow to Nasrallah's leadership. which is evident now in terms of lack of planning in Hezbollah's response to Israel's continuous infliction of pretty devastating attacks on its military capabilities and degrading of its military capabilities. We also have the Hamas leadership, military commanders like Mohammed Daif being eliminated. So we'll have to see what happens next, because one of the things happened with the pagers explosion in Beirut was that, according to reports and social media tweets, 100 plus IRGC Sepah, Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps fighters were also injured, including the Iranian ambassador Mojtaba Amini, who's now since been flown back to Tehran. And he was visited by the IRGC commander Hassan Salami. While Salami's visit to the hospital was telecast, there were no visual pictures of Ambassador Amani. And typically, the Iranian ambassador in Beirut is drawn from the IRGC. I think my two colleagues in Beirut are aware of that. Also, lastly, Hezbollah's counterstrikes of the last couple of days have been fended off. Of course, there will be some damage, particularly in Haifa and to the Rafale defense production unit. But by and large, Israel has so far managed to counter Hezbollah's counterstrikes. We'll have to see how this plays out. I think it's still ongoing. Ceasefire is essential. It will help civilian populations on all sides, and this is something I believe Prime Minister Modi conveyed to President Mahmoud Abbas when he met the Palestinian leader in New York on the sidelines of the ongoing Summit of the Future sessions. I'll quickly turn to Iran because I think it's a very important player. Its fingers are everywhere. As Israelis call it, it's the octopus head, which needs to be knocked off. Therefore, assassination of Iranian commanders in both Beirut, in Lebanon and Syria has been ongoing. As of course, the spectacular attack on Ismail Haniyeh in July shows the extent of breach the Israelis have managed within the Iranian security and intelligence systems. This is not for the first time we have seen them carry out a spectacular attack. We have seen in the past sabotage of the Natanz nuclear plant. We have seen the transportation of high security documents from a warehouse outside of Tehran. And then, of course, the killing of the Iranian nuclear scientist in 2020, November 2020, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. All these obviously go back to Israel, and they are denied plausible deniability. But it also casts a light on the failure of the Iranian security structure to repel these systems while being able to reach out and support the Houthis in Yemen, or the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, and of course the Hamas. But somewhere they are not able to properly defend the homeland. And this came to the fore again in the post-April 13th direct attack by Iran on Israel. The Israeli response of a few days later penetrated Iranian air defense systems. But I think both sides wish to stand it down, and again, like I said, somewhere Iranians' security and intelligence structure is something which has always been debated within the system, and they have not come up with a proper answer. Iran remains an important player, but also its handling of the axis of resistance, as the Iranians themselves call it, is interesting. It's kind of decentralized. Each of the members of the axis manage their own affairs. For instance, Iran claims, and rightfully so, that they were not aware of Hamas's decision to launch these attacks on Israel on October 7th. So somewhere there is a kind of decentralization coupled with solid economic and financial support and tactical military support in terms of arms and components for missiles and rockets. We also see that Iran was quite happy to let the Houthis and also in Syria to some extent test their weapon systems. All the missiles which are being used have been done, have actually verified their battlefield, effectivity, I would say. What has happened this year, particularly post-April, is interesting, and it's, I think, something we need to note. The death of President Raisi and Foreign Minister Amir Abdullahian has paved the way for the election of moderate president. Raisi was a hardliner. Anyone following Iranian politics will know that. So Pezeshkian's appointment is important. I think somewhere Supreme Leader has made a tactical change domestically within Iran to kind of balance the various factions, which can be quite quite competitive and they can damage the system. So I think somewhere Pezeshkian's election is a signal that the Supreme Leader is now from a far right Raisi presidency is now back to not exactly the Rouhani days, but that period. I think we are back to the pendulum has swung back to the center. We'll see a much more moderate presidency going forward, at least for the next couple of years. And the appointment of Javed Zarif as vice president and strategic advisor to Pezeshkian is very important because Zarif has been on record and has been recorded saying that why are we being more Palestinian than the Palestinians? He has for long held that we should focus on the homeland and resuscitate our economic well-being and look after our people. That has been Zarif's consistent approach, and hence his negotiating approach to the 2015 JCPOA. I think coupled with this recalibration of the Supreme Leader's approach has been Israel's exposure of the costs which it can impose to the Iranian leadership of fostering those members of the Axis, with their only objective being to pin down Israel. I think they have, in the last couple of weeks, exposed flaws in the Iranian strategy, which have been very successfully carried out for many years. But I think Israel has called the bluff with its devastation of the Hamas, its attacks on the Houthis, particularly the launch of a long-distance aerial strike on the Hodeidah port in June, and now the devastation and degradation of Hezbollah's capabilities. So the costs, I think it's making the Iranian leadership reassess the cost-benefit ratio of supporting these actors. But like I said, Iran has always followed quite a decentralized approach with the Axis members, while giving them material support, letting them make tactical decisions on their own, but particularly with Hezbollah, which, as is commonly said, is the crown jewel for the Iranian establishment. I think that then brings me to the point, why has Iran's response been so muted, particularly after Haniyeh's assassination in the heart of Tehran? I've lived in that part where the Sepah headquarters are based, and it's very heavily guarded, and that building is bang in the middle of a very vast complex which the Sepah controls. Assassinating Haniyeh in that is actually hitting the underbelly of the Sepah. But Iran's response has been muted, as it's been mostly vocal. They have given verbal assurances, but beyond that, nothing. So this leads me to my conclusion that Iran has become much more calculating and is preparing, I would say, for re-engaging, I would say, the next US administration. So until we finish the US presidential elections in November, I think we will see some kind of hedging, nuance approach Iran will take. And I think so far the Pezeshkian government will maintain its posture of giving verbal support, but stopping short of actual any direct involvement. I think we will have to see how this plays out. But my calculation is the Iranians are going to play long. And they are preparing for, I think Arakchi has made it very clear. Of course, the typical, bluster will be there. It has to address both the domestic hardline constituencies and it has to address the Shia Ummah who look up to Iran for guidance. So I think they've made all the right noises. But right now, I don't think they're willing to go beyond that. What then the future? One, I think the November presidential elections is something the Iranians, as others, are waiting to see what the outcome will be. Arakchi, the foreign minister, has already said that they will want to enter into a new nuclear accord. He says the JCPOA is no longer operational. There has been a change, one because of the expiry of some, or the setting in of some sunset clauses, and therefore some of the restrictions have been lifted. Secondly, I think he said there's been a change in the regional security situation. So he said we should have a new nuclear deal. I think there is also related to this some impatience in Iran with Sinwar. I think the Iranians wanted Sinwar to get a ceasefire, get a deal on the hostages. Therefore, there is some displeasure, I believe, in Tehran in terms of the approach Hamas has taken. So not directly supporting Hamas is a signaling, I would say, or I would read, maybe I may be wrong, but I would read it as some displeasure with the tactics of Hamas. This is again similar to Netanyahu, who's playing the hard game. And like I said earlier, he wants to establish battlefield dominance so as to control the negotiations outcome. Again, back on the other actors, I would say that the Saudis and the Emiratis have been quite guarded. If I recall correctly, there was no response for quite some time or condemnation of the assassination of Sinwar, of Haniyeh in Tehran for quite a few days. And then slowly both the sides came out and did condemn the assassination. There will be a delay for the time being, indefinite, I would say, of any rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I think right now the Saudis there's no appetite in the Saudi leadership to step into this accord. Other than that, the diplomatic exchanges in the region, particularly between the GCC countries and Iran, has been ongoing. The latest being Bahrain, which is very significant, being a Shia majority country, and given the long-standing tensions between Iran and Bahrain. That has been, I think, by and large, the Sunni street and the Shia street have been kept under control. I think that's significant. Whatever demonstrations, I think, have been contained, managed, and engineered by the leadership in all the capitals. The ultimate fear being they don't want a replay of the Arab Spring, where demonstrations started with economic grievance and then quickly escalated into overthrow of the regime. I think there is still some fears in the leadership across the region. Lastly, although this is completely unrelated to the topic at hand, Iran particularly is preoccupied with developments in the Caucasus, particularly Azerbaijan and Armenia, and the role Russia wants to play in that, particularly the opening of the Zangezur corridor. So that's I think there is obviously some oxygen which is being taken away by that preoccupation of the regime. But by and large, I think Pezeshkian's ascendancy to the presidency will pave the way for a much more pragmatic policy formulation in the coming weeks and months, some of which is already at play, I would say. We are seeing initial signs of it, and I would assess, I would watch this carefully to see how it plays out. And my assessment would be that we may see going forward, we will see a much more pragmatic Iranian leadership. I hope I'm correct. I'll stop there and once again thank all of you in Osanas and look forward to
Thank you,
hearing to my
Ambassador,
colleagues
for
from
that
Beirut. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very detailed and insightful presentation about various actors and how they are doing it. Definitely, there are certain doubts. Perhaps Iranians are being more pragmatic at this stage. Although we saw that there are flaws in Iranian and their proxy strategy, that there are a lot of talk, but when it comes to, they can perhaps inflict damage outside, but their own capability of defending themselves definitely has been questioned significantly during these, both in Gaza and now in Lebanon. But the problem is that the Lebanese themselves don't want to get caught into this war. How will they save themselves? And that is something I think that our next speaker will perhaps tell us. Mr. Tashian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you also for the Usanas Foundation for organizing this important and timely, I think, panel. I do agree with almost what His Excellency said about Iran's positions. I can say like very calculated and measured position, which also to some extent reflects on Hezbollah's position. Talking a bit from also like the Lebanese and also Hezbollah's perspective based on the analysis on the media, and also maybe to link it to the US elections and how things would go forward. So, I mean, Israel seems that it wants to get away also the attention from Gaza and the atrocities there, despite like raising Gaza to the ground and assassinating most of the top military figures of Hamas. Still, Hamas is to some extent, it's there, it's not destroyed. There is also the issue of the kidnapped or the Israeli hostages. So it seems that Netanyahu also wants a pretext to continue this war, even though a limited way with Hezbollah, and this is why we have an escalation on the Lebanese front. I mean, we have almost 100,000 now Lebanese IDPs, starting from October 8th, and in the last few days, the number have increased. The international community is silent, but of course, not surprisingly. I mean, there were announcements by the US, the UN arguing that, I mean, that the UN Special Coordinator to Lebanon, she said that there is no military solution for the current crisis, and also they warned that the Middle East is on the brink of an immediate catastrophe. So, talking also about what we may witness in the short period of time. So basically, we will try to analyze the outcome of conventional army versus a guerrilla organization. It means that usually these types of war or battles take a longer and also bloodier path. The former, in this case, the conventional army, I mean, engages in combined, let's say, unit to include infantry, artillery, armor, and also the air force. I mean, we have witnessed that the Israeli air force is superior to Hezbollah, and also Israel has the advantage of technology, which is another main objective or success of Israel. So while the latter, when it comes to Hezbollah as a guerrilla organization, it engages usually in a small unit tactics involving ambush and sabotage techniques, and also missile or drone launching. And between 2006, that is the last war between Lebanon or Hezbollah and Israel, until recently, mid-September 2024, there was to some extent this deterrence, which Hezbollah used to call the balance of fear, or some people used to call the balance of terror. So it was to some extent a deterrence. That is, if Israel attacked, Hezbollah would retaliate. And then everything would have stopped. It was a managed conflict between both sides. Of course, until this balance triggered, until the pager attacks and the yesterday escalation on Lebanon. So basically, it seems that now Israel is aiming to force Hezbollah to accept a new equation, a post-2006 equation on the ground, and coming to the conventional versus guerrilla wars, air raids, even if the geographical scope is expanded, will not fulfill Israel's objective. Because first, I mean, the main is, at least the public Israeli objectives are first the return of the settlers back to the north, and also to create some sort of buffer zone in South Lebanon that is below the Litani River. Only actually a land invasion can trigger or this objectives, but I doubt until now that Israel can conduct a land invasion to South Lebanon, because it is a very risky scenario and things may get out of control. And also, despite the fact that bombing and assassinating Hezbollah officials and leaders, it may be significantly limited Hezbollah's maybe retaliation attacks. However, when it comes to ground invasion, Hezbollah would have the upper hand, because we are literally saying South Lebanon is larger than Gaza. And also, when it comes to guerrilla warfare, engaging battles in the mountains, in the caves, in the villages, it's always advantageous to a guerrilla organization, unlike a conventional army when it comes to Hezbollah. Israel. So at the same time, there are here difficult choices for both Hezbollah and Israel. I mean, when it comes to Hezbollah, which doesn't want completely to wage a direct war with Israel, and this is only not also a reflection of Iran's regional policy, but also Hezbollah, because it has its domestic calculations. As the Mr. Ambassador said, that we have a financial crisis in Lebanon, already we have Syrian refugees, so Lebanon already has its own problems. So Hezbollah is that either it should retaliate very softly, or it should retaliate very strongly, so that it recreate the balance of, let's say, fear with Israel. The issue is that how Israel in this case will retaliate. So either it will escalate situation and we will end up with a big war, or actually everything will come and we will de-escalate situation. Of course, this is also to some extent is dependent on the ongoing diplomatic back-channel negotiations in New York. There is the UN General Assembly meetings now. The Iranian officials are there. The Lebanese Prime Minister is there. So everything is also dependent on the, let's say, the diplomatic negotiations. So either, as I said, we are heading to the culmination of clashes and go back to the 2006, where a ground battle will actually dictate terms for a new ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, or things will calm down based on the outcome of the negotiations that are taking place now in New York. Of course, the US perspective here is very important. I mean, the Biden administration announced that it will try to carry out its effort to prevent the emergence of a wider war in Lebanon. But my personal perspective is that also there is an irony, because the same administration failed to stop the ongoing mass killings in Gaza. It has been almost 1 year. And Hezbollah's position is that if there will be a ceasefire in Gaza, then also there will be a ceasefire in South Lebanon. So as long as the war in Gaza continues, then the battle, the front with Lebanon, between Lebanon and Israel will be open. So everything is also to some extent dependent on the ongoing negotiations in New York now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yagya, for outlining the situation on the ground, and also about the feasibility of the ground assault and the relative positions of power of both the parties involved, and also the likely escalation scenario. So before, we discuss these things later in the Q&A session in detail. I would like to invite Armenak to share his thoughts on the subject. After that, definitely, when Ambassador Trigunayat joins, he can continue from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Armenak, for the invitation, and thanks for the Usanas Foundation for this indeed very timely discussion. Trying not to repeat what my colleagues said, because by and large I agree with their assessments. I want to first take a step back and try to share my view on the security situation in the whole region in Levant, but also in the Middle East, because what we are witnessing today is not simply a war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, or an Israeli-Hezbollah war in southern Lebanon and northern Israel, but it is a bigger attempt to shift the security architecture in the Levant, but also perhaps in the Middle East. And the main player, or the main catalyst for this change is Israel, which the past almost a year has proved that it is adamant to neutralize and eliminate serious threats from near its borders, mainly through destroying Hamas, but also Gaza Strip in general. And not only postponing the war for another war in Gaza for many years, but perhaps eliminating the possibility of reemergence such a war with massive destruction, and also near destruction of Hamas, and attempted control of every passage from outside world to Gaza. Now the next theater near the border is Lebanon, and Israel's attempt to seriously weaken Hamas in southern Lebanon. But I think the Israeli policy, or they are adamant not to change the status quo around their border, but also beyond that. And the best example is Syria, where Israel has been active since 2011-12, but more so after October 7 attack, to neutralize Iranian and pro-Iranian targets in Syria, not only close to the occupied Golan Heights, but also well deep into Syria, extending to Aleppo, to Deir ez-Zor, and to central part of Syria. So in general, I think to sum up, Israel is up to changing not just the security situation around its borders, but also well beyond that. Why I mention this is because this has major implications not only on Israel and its neighbors, but also on the entire region. Major implications on Iran's expansionist strategy in the region, which has been ongoing for quite some time. There will be major implications on Israeli-Arab relations, Arab-Iranian relations, and also the future of U.S. presence in the region. So, in a sense, we are witnessing the beginning of a major confrontation, which can escalate and de-escalate at times, but I think it is not anytime near to its ending. Coming more specifically to Syria, and which is the country and the area that I work mostly on, I think we all know, all our spectators know, that Syria was a very central and essential part of the Arab-Israeli conflict since the beginning. And more so once Egypt and Jordan, signed a peace deal with Israel, Syria became a very important, even more important player, having a front line with Israel, having occupied lands by Israel, but also being one of the main sponsors of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Today, we see a much more marginal role to Syria, and the reasons are quite obvious. For more than a decade now, Syrian army is in ruins. It has very minimal military capabilities to enter a war or confront Israel, and it has become more of a battleground to regional confrontations, including Israeli-Iranian war. In fact, interestingly, in the past year, the leadership in Damascus has actively tried to avoid confrontation with Israel, which is a bit ironic because the whole doctrine of Ba'ath, the Ba'athist regime and the ideology, or if not the whole, in large part, is based on resisting and liberating occupied lands by Israel. But today we see the leadership in Damascus trying to navigate a very tightrope to avoid any major confrontation with Israel. One major evidence of that is how Damascus tries to keep the Golan Heights front calm. We haven't seen any major activity so far, and the Russian involvement in the south is another indication that that Damascus does not really want to get involved directly into this conflict. However, that being said, Syria still plays a very important role, and that is being a transit road between Iran, Iraq, and Hezbollah. And despite Syria being very weak in perhaps all aspects, politically, economically, and militarily, it is still is the geographic link between Iran and Hezbollah, and the link that Hezbollah very much depends on getting resupplies and being connected to Iran and its proxies in the region. I suspect that if there is a war I mean, there is a war in Lebanon, to speak frankly, but if there is a ground Israeli invasion to Lebanon and there is a total war, let's say, I think the role of Syria as a transit hub will increase, and so will the repercussions on the country. To answer one of the main questions of this panel, whether peace is possible, peace is a powerful and deep word. I have studied peace and I have a major in peace and conflict studies, so I don't think peace is possible or anywhere attainable in the near future, because so much history of conflict and bad blood there is between Israel and Palestine, or Palestinians, Lebanon, and others. So I think in the near future we are not likely to see peace. But conflict mitigation, de-escalation, those are more possible scenarios. And let me quickly take quick snapshots from the region. When it comes to Gaza and West Bank, I am the most pessimistic about these regions, because the Israeli approach, without justifying what Hamas did in 7 October, but the Israeli approach to Gaza has been quite aggressive and arguably aimed not just defeating Hamas, but also destroying quite a lot of infrastructure, which the rebuilding of it will be almost entirely under its supervision. So I'm very pessimistic about a brighter future for Gaza, but also the West Bank, where we see, despite all this suffering, I think there is still Israeli expansion. The expansionist policy, which is one of the core problems, is continuing as we speak. But also we are witnessing weak and corrupt and incapable Palestinian leadership, which is unable to deliver anything to the Palestinian people. So I'm quite pessimistic on that front. When it comes to Gaza and the West Bank, we cannot talk about them without, referring to Egypt and Jordan. And Jordan is one of the countries that I visit a lot. And it is an underestimation to say that Jordanians are rightly very concerned what's happening in Gaza and West Bank, especially the push by extremists and right-wing Israeli politicians who talk about depopulation and a more drastic demographic change. This is very concerning, of course, but it could also be very destabilizing for Jordan and to a lesser extent to Egypt. And in my conclusion, to conclude a bit on a more brighter, more optimistic note, whether conflict mitigation and partial agreements are possible, I think they are. Perhaps not attainable immediately, as we are, peaking the escalation of this conflict at the moment. However, let's not forget a number of factors. One is that despite all the history of conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, and Lebanon and Israel, we witnessed a demarcation of the maritime borders between Lebanon and Israel. So some agreements are possible. This is partial, doesn't mean peace, but nevertheless, it was an agreement. The second factor to keep in mind is that Iran regardless of its rhetoric, I think is and as the ambassador was mentioning, with the new leadership, perhaps they are bringing a bit more pragmatism than usual. And Iran historically has sat on many tables and negotiated many deals. And without Iranian consent, I think the maritime border agreement would not have happened in Lebanon. So there is degree of pragmatism on Iran's side, which is the main player. When it comes to Israel, it is difficult to judge at the moment because Israelis seem to be on an all-out war motivated by the trauma of 7 October and the plans of changing the whole security architecture in the region, arguably. However, I think from my readings, even the most hawkish Israelis in the government, they realize that at some point, there needs to be some sort of talking and not just bombing and fighting, which gives me a slight hope that not now, but perhaps down the line, some sort of an agreement, whether that is in Lebanon, but also wider in the region, could be achievable. Thank you.
Thank you, Armenak. You touched upon various aspects. I'm so sorry that hope you are able to hear me. I'm so sorry I was just signed off by the laptop because of its heating, but I missed out a little bit on the previous speaker, but I think that I get the hang of it, that it is not possible that any peace in the short run, but there are discussions happening. I believe France has called for a UN Security Council meeting urgently with regard to this Israel-Hezbollah war that's going on. And hopefully there will be some sense will prevail, because this war is not leading anywhere. I mean, Israelis are also stretched to the limit. It's really not. They are also in a bad shape. Militarily, I mean, I heard they are asking the African immigrants to join the Israeli army today. So they are having a big issues themselves. So it's not that easy. And if the full-fledged war eventually happens, even though Hezbollah may not be able to perhaps protect Lebanon, but it can definitely inflict much more damage on Israel. And that is, I don't think Israelis also know that. And possibly are just testing the waters at the moment. And as you some kind of a buffer between these Lebanon and Israel, so that they can return some of the people for domestic consumption. It's quite this is driven by that as well. So I must thank you all for really deliberating on very key issues. And if we have any questions, I'm sure. Do we have any questions?
Yes, sir. I have a question. Can I?
Yes, please. Yes,
Thank you very much. So my question is basically about Israel's strategic calculations. I mean, what ultimately Israel wants or thinks about the whole situation at hand. As Ambassador Trigunayat rightly mentioned, that they want to create some kind of a buffer zone between that Lebanon and Israel northern region near the Litani River. And the previous speaker Yegia also mentioned that if there's a land battle between Hezbollah and Israel, Hezbollah can inflict significant damage on Israel, sending most of their population into shelters for weeks on end. However, there are two possibilities here. Please answer me if I'm wrong. Is Israel thinking that since most of the bigger powers are busy somewhere else, as Russia is busy in the Ukraine conflict and Iran is busy in Azerbaijan, Americans are also too occupied with the European scenario. Given that situation, this is the best chance for Israel to finally annihilate Hezbollah and Hamas. Is that one consideration? Also, adding to this factor, does Israel think that maybe after 5 years, it would be like extremely difficult for Israel to completely annihilate these enemy countries? Let's say Iran is able to develop a nuclear arsenal in a very strong manner, and Americans are not able to support or Israel the way they are supporting now, because the other powers like Russia or China, they become much more involved and much more assertive, given the changes that are taking place in the world scenario right now. So is Israel thinking that this is the best chance to annihilate its enemies? Now, if that is the case, then it seems very logical that Israel is going to escalate the situation in the future also. Now, if that happens, how long Iran is going to sit quiet? On what about the possibilities of the entry of other Middle Eastern powers like Saudis and Egypt, or their reaction to this whole scenario? This is my first question. Please, this is to all the speakers. Please discuss all these questions in your answers. And also, my second question: after the U.S. elections, I mean, what kind of scenarios you forecast in case of the arrival of, let's say, Kamala Harris or Trump? What can be the possible differences or the possible scenarios that we may witness?
Abhinav has raised some important points. First, I think we have to keep in mind that since the Balfour Declaration in 1947, Israel, the regional situation has been animated. Israel has consistently through the decades, it's been existential questions for the country, and this is translated also to Lebanon and to the West Bank, as one of our colleagues pointed out. I think pre-October 2007 has to be noted to understand where we are today. One, Hamas-Palestine question was completely off the table. The reconciliation through the Abraham Accords of Israel, the normalization of engaging Israel, exchanging diplomats, embassies, particularly led by Emirates, Morocco, I think Sudan, if I'm not mistaken, and Bahrain, with the expectation that at some stage Saudi Arabia will follow. I believe that could have been one of the triggers for what Hamas did on October 7th. Not expecting that operation would have been so successful. But for Israel, it has always been an existential question. But also, again, as our colleagues from Beirut pointed out, Israel's actions have not it's not been held accountable for some of its actions, particularly the settler issue in the West Bank. This has caused immense suffering to the Palestinians. Israel has also, particularly under Netanyahu's leadership, been embroiled in a lot of its own domestic politics. So I think all these mix pre-October 7th and then post where we are today has contributed to the present crises, as I would see it. I think going forward, we'll have to address the question of the Palestinian Authority. Abbas has been weak. The Palestinian Authority has shown that it's not capable of administration, as has the Hamas in Gaza. They have consistently foregone all kind of opportunities. And lastly, to a country which I'm closely associated with, I've heard in the street across Iran, in many parts of the country, what have we got to do with Palestine? And I kind of ask people, and they say, it's so far away. Our resources are being wasted on people we have nothing to do with. Like for instance, Hamas is Sunni. So while there may be connections with the Hezbollah, there is really very little connection with Hamas, and also with the Houthis, who profess a certain subsect of Shiism, as does the leadership in Damascus. So Abhinav, I think going forward, that will be issues coupled with this chimera that the US is exiting the region and going off to some other region, particularly the Indo-Pacific. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, just look at the physical assets and the number of bases the United States has in that region, with the biggest base being in Qatar. So I think that is one aspect, and then I can come back to the post-election scenario after our colleagues in Beirut answer your first question. Thank you.
Yeah. Next, please.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, very quickly, I think Israel will try to escalate the situation. I was because just trying to read what the chief of the Israeli army, so it's the chief of
General Harabi.
the chief of the Israeli army. He said that we'll try to escalate, and now a few minutes ago they also bombed southern Beirut. Assuming that they have targeted Hezbollah officials. So, as long as this deterrence is not balanced, Israel will continue. And as I said, the question is that how this deterrence will be balanced by Hezbollah. I think this is a matter of time. If there will be a new form of deterrence, I assume that we may reach to a ceasefire agreement. And if Israel realizes that actually no, Hezbollah has been weakened, that it will continue to escalate the situation, at least to try to revise the 1701, maybe UN Security Council resolution.
Any other comment?
I think my quick take on that is that for many years, I think we've seen Israel trying to manage a lot of the security problems on its borders, and the best example perhaps is Gaza and Israel's tacit covered relations with Hamas and how they used it, particularly Netanyahu, in internal politics. I think the strategic shift, arguably, because it's difficult to say until the dust settles, but arguably the strategic shift is that postponing the security threats and conflicts for a year or two or five is seemingly not enough anymore for Israel's decision-making establishment. So I think the major difference this time in this round of conflict is that they are going to push as hard as they can to eliminate certain threats once and for all, or postpone it to a degree that a conflict or a threat will not occur for quite some time. This is how I see this shift in the strategic thinking of Israel.
Abhinav, if I can address the second question, the post-election scenario, particularly U.S. post-election scenario. I think from Tehran's perspective, the ground has already been laid. I said that in my opening comments. The ground has been laid. They would like to re-engage the US, the EU 3, the P5 plus the EU in these discussions. I think they're preparing for that. Arakchi has made some interesting comments. To refresh, I said that Arakchi said we should have a new nuclear deal. Landscape has changed, and some provisions in terms of the sunset clauses have kicked in. So I think they are looking forward to shaping how it can be. But the caveat they have put forward to the Americans is sanctions relief. They are looking for sanctions relief that will make a big difference for them economically, which will then have a big difference in terms of social stability, which is fundamental for the regime survival. Who would they prefer, Harris or Trump? They've been bitten by both sides. The expectations they had of the Biden administration, the familiarity they had with Blinken, Sullivan, and Wendy Sherman, all of who were instrumental in the negotiations leading up to the conclusion of the JCPOA, along with the same actors, Javed Zarif and Abbas Arakchi. They feel let down. But again, I think somewhere my own sense is they would now prefer to, I mean, Iranians being Iranians, typically Bazaris, they would like to cut a deal, and they will be looking for a deal. I think it's a long period. Elections end in November, and the next administration doesn't kick in till January. We're looking at a period of 3 months of transition in the US. And during this time, we'll have to see first how contested or not contested will the US election be. I think the Trump administration, the Trump party is already laying the ground for challenging any decision, particularly if it goes against them. then what will Harris's team be like? Are we going to see the Blinkens and the Sullivans and all of them continue if Harris wins the presidency? So we'll have to wait and see how this goes. Another equation we have to keep in mind, Abhinav, in addition to your question, is the role of China and Russia directly bilaterally with Iran and also in the region. Do keep in mind, China has been hosting Taliban delegations, it's been hosting Hamas delegations, it's been making comments on Israeli actions in the region. So we'll have to factor in their roles also in any next administration which comes in. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Now coming to your issue of China hosting Taliban delegation, recently in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, I saw the Taliban delegation, and they made quite a scene out there, actually, playing with different gadgets and all. That was quite a funny sight. So thank you very much for your answers. Just one more related question. So lately, when I have met several Iranian scholars and the common people, I see a lot of frustration and disgruntlement against the regime, particularly after this hijab movement. Several people, like the people from the country itself, like they suggest that if something of this sort happens next time, it'll be very difficult for the regime to survive. So do you have some thoughts on the sustainability and survivability of this regime, since this is facing pressures from both, like from internal side and also from the external side?
Abhinav, very quickly again, I'll just comment directly because it's an interesting question. It's an important question. I think throughout the 40 years of the Islamic Revolution since 1979, regime stability is something which has obsessed the minds of the clergy, the ruling clergy. And they have been very, very careful and ruthless in defending the system, the establishment. They've learned from the Shah's mistakes, the kind of mistakes the Shah made in antagonizing the Bazaris, in antagonizing the intellectuals. The clergy are very clear. They're very clever. They're very smart, and they've proven to be smart administrators. So they have co-opted people across all sections of society. They have very little support, paradoxically. I would say, I would put the figure at maybe quarter of the population, those who are deeply tied to the economic and the what do you say, subsidy systems which the regime throws up. So somewhere the support is very short, very what do you say, in the it's a small ratio of the whole population. But the dominance of the establishment across university campuses, across security systems, across the commercial establishments is very firm. It's very well established. You really cannot go across against the system, as we saw in the ruthless manner in which they addressed the challenge which came out of the hijab protest in September 2022. We saw how brutally it was put down, and they waited for a period of time. They absorbed the shocks from the society, and then they were just kind of they went after all the young children. They were just out of their teens. And I remember in my neighborhood, kids coming out shouting slogans and all. There is a huge anti-regime sentiment within the country, across sectors. But I must tell you also, the Iranian psychology is to not become another Syria or another Iraq or a Lebanon. I think there is deep-seated fear in society that any upsetting of the establishment, any challenge to the establishment, the question they ask themselves is, what next? What will happen the day after? Remember, in 1979, February, the Shah fled Iran, which paved the way for Khomeini to establish his system and then, consolidate his reign, because there was no challenger. And all the young leftists, the revolutionaries who supported the restoration of Khomeini, we invited him back into the country. They were all eliminated by Khomeini in the next couple of years. I mean, Raisi was one of the people who was part of the judicial system, which sent hundreds and hundreds of youngsters to the gallows. I think that challenge is not there for the establishment. They've kind of eliminated it. If at all, it can come from overseas. But again, like I said in my opening comments, Israel has repeatedly shown that it can breach Iranian security systems, Iranian intelligence. So the focus of the ruling establishment has been to prevent any challenges arising to its survival and to its existence. And therefore, we see the regime it's very divided. It's a very factional system, but they all unite on the red line that there should be no threat to the system. I think on that they're all united. Going forward, I would also say that I have noticed in my personal experience a certain elasticity between the people and the establishment. The people will push the establishment, but only up to a point, and then they'll step back. And similarly, the establishment, particularly its security apparatus, will come down on the people, but up to a point. I think both know exactly how to keep that tension alive without it breaking and then upsetting the system. Because, like I said, they don't want to become another Lebanon. They don't want to become another Syria. The people are they're very comfortable in their, holidays in Paris, and the less rich people, they go across Iran. I've met them in remote villages, in remote towns, in nice touristy places. They're quite happy traveling around in their cars with their, with their kebabs and everything in the car, and the whole families are inside. They're quite happy. I think as long as that continues, the system will survive. But do also keep in mind that it's been under US sanctions for 40 years. It's not collapsed. They are a very intelligent people. They are a very smart people, as evidenced by their reverse engineering of very sophisticated delivery systems. But they are, after all, supplying drones. Whatever may be their capability, they are supplying drones to the Russians, which has actually prevented Ukraine from establishing dominance in certain sectors on the Ukraine-Russia front. Iranian drones were responsible for swarming Ukrainian air defense system. So they are very capable people, and I don't think they're just going to roll over and become a North Korea or a Myanmar. And again, here is the difference. They don't have a patron. The Iranians, proud civilization, a very proud people, stand on their own. North Korea has patrons. It's got a Russia to support it in the UN Security Council. It's got a China to support it against American sanctions. Myanmar has China to support it, has some ASEAN like Thailand and of course India. The regime survived, but Iran stands alone, and it does not have patrons, and it has managed very deftly to navigate very difficult issues. But again, typically Iranian psychology. Why do you want to bring troubles upon yourselves? You have no skin in the game in the Israeli, Palestine, Lebanon issue. You've gone and created problems in an absolutely fantastic country like Lebanon. You've exported your revolution to Lebanon, and now that country is devastated. So I think, sorry, a long answer to your question is, regime is fairly stable. It's brutal in preserving its existence, and it will thwart any challenges. There is a delicate balance between the governed, the rulers, and the governed. I think each knows where to draw the line. And economically, they've survived. I see that's going to be the case. Let's see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you.
A quick word, Abhinav. Perhaps we're out of time, but yeah. I couldn't tell much about the Iranian regime in Iran because that's beyond my expertise, but I want to shed some light on a few points in the region and in Iranian strategy in the region. We've seen time again that Iranian expansion and the building of influence and pockets of influence in the region has been quite successful. And I think one of the major achievements for them and challenges for Israel has been that Iran and its proxies in the region have been able to absorb a lot of shocks and recover over time. So to me, more and more, this war is showing that they rather play the long game take a lot of slaps, take a lot of damage, but then they will be, if they survive, they will be able to regenerate their influence in the region once again. And it's a big question for Israel whether they will be able to actually tackle this issue. If you take Syria as an example, and this is the country that I know best, it's been incredible to see how they create pockets of interest all around the country, and their physical presence and influence is very elastic. It expands at times and it shrinks at times. So it is very difficult. So you are not really dealing with a solid body or entity to destroy it once and for all. They have been really resilient in the region, and that has been a major challenge for Israel. Time will show, and this conflict will show whether Israel will have some sort of a counter strategy for this resilience.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I think it's we have reached our time, and we have had excellent, enriching discussions. Don't see many questions out from outside. But what remains here is to thank all our distinguished speakers today. And I think we must do another one only on Iran, because we have experts here. One thing I would like to just say that, Iran also has regional ambitions. It is a regional leader. And today, Iran has become, it needs a cause. And the cause is that it has become a benefactor, as well as the cause of Palestine, which gives it an added advantage over the Arab countries, which have given up basically on the Palestinian cause. So that's what is, I think, the reason to get involved in Palestine with others, despite this. And that also is the beauty of the Iranian diplomacy is, and I have found very smart, is that I think they have this asymmetric advantage across the Sunni and the Shia world. And that is something that must be granted to them. So I think at this point, I would just like to express my gratitude both to Usanas Foundation and to all our speakers who have joined us, taken time to share their thoughts. And I'm sure that this video will become eventually more available to a large number of people through the Usanas network. Thank you once again.
Thank you. And
Thank you for having us
in Beirut.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Stay
Thank you.
safe,
Thanks for
you
joining.
guys. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Stay
Abhinav.
safe. Yes. Thank you. Bye-bye.